Hi, it's close to 6 a.m. over here in India. The last session that I recorded, I talked about how the CEO is the best executive to run the product organization through, of course, a business structure in a retail company where each function would have its own functional heads from a product standpoint, completely and very closely aligned with the business leaders. So merchandising would have a merchandising head along with a product head, both completely aligned, having a structured shared budget in terms of what initiatives to unlock, what value to unlock through a year. And of course, in this structure, if merchandising needs to, say, work with the supply chain team in order to create a new way of fulfilling the special items that the buyers have basically secured for the holiday season, for example, then there is the opportunity for the product heads to also closely align between these two business functions and identify opportunities to accelerate the efforts and basically create the business process value flow in terms of how things need to work for the customer and what operational changes and opportunities need to be pursued in order to get the initiative out the door and provide the value that's needed for the customer. So now we had a viewpoint on how the org structure needs to be played out for a product team or a department in a retail company. The next one that comes up is now you have the product teams in place, you have the functional heads, at best a director, maybe a VP of product, if at all you want to stretch the responsibilities because of the size of the organization, say if it's an Amazon or a Walmart, but nevertheless it doesn't go beyond that into a CPO role. Now once we do that, the other question or the next question obviously is, what do we do now in terms of planning the work to be done? Now this is where the idea of OKR, objectives and key results, comes into the picture. OKRs have been in vogue for quite some time, ever since Google introduced it and ever since Google product managers, semi-retired product managers from these internet product companies started selling the idea that OKRs is the way to make innovation happen. It's pretty much the way to manage companies, which is kind of ironical because retail companies have been in existence for almost a century, if not a couple of decades, much more than what the internet product companies have been in existence for. However, everything that comes down to any level of digital strategies, adoption of new practices, has been set by the internet product companies. And OKRs is one such thing that, if I'm not wrong, Google set it up a couple of, I would say, decades back, pretty much during the beginning of their growth phase. And acceleration, and it really caught on due to the simplicity of how it's able to organize the work structure and the work culture to race towards uh, being more competitive and create more value for the customer quarter to quarter or through a year, a fiscal year, provide much more opportunities for the internal teams to provide a lot more of value through software. This obviously has been copied almost to the T by pretty much all retail organizations, and companies like Walmart, Target, for that matter, any other company, even in the Indian context, have been pretty much on this OKR business, what I would call as the OKR madness. My belief is that, and this is the crux of this video, the OKR idea or concept is a little bit ill-suited for retail companies, omni-channel companies especially, in the context of how OKRs run more than how OKRs are set up. OKRs being set up, I think, is a little bit of a company culture and a company way of doing things, and mostly you can't find fault. Obviously, you can pinpoint and say like, well, a certain objective is too vague or a certain key result mostly is too spread out and not specifically chasing a certain target that could be measured in the future. Now, keeping some of those aspects aside, assuming that those are somehow easy to solve or at least meaningfully easy to solve, one of the big challenges as to why I feel like OKRs don't really make a difference if they are structured in that quarterly Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 cadence is that it really creates a mad rush towards making sure that the teams are constantly churning to create key results and revising them, not seeing the completion of their work in that quarter, again going back and then basically extending things from one quarter to the other. And eventually, in some ways, I would say force fitting the idea of OKRs into a structure that exists in retail companies that doesn't lend to that kind of pace which internet product companies benefit from, because as I said, internet product companies like Meta, Google, Netflix for that matter, they're not pushing physical products out to customers. They don't really have a strong supply chain logistics or what you would call as a back-end interface or a back-end operational capability that is equally, if not highly important compared to just the front end or the customer facing aspects of how products are identified and how a customer is making a purchase. So if you look at it that way, you tend to understand that it's a very quick rush towards creating things when it comes to a quarterly cadence. My understanding, my recommendation is that OKRs are good in terms of the simplicity of the exercise, but for retail omnichannel firms, they at best need to be set up once in a year. In the case of a company that is a small to mid-sized company which has a little bit more opportunities to accelerate, a more younger company, I would probably say a half-yearly exercise, doing it twice a year is the best way to do it, and nothing more than that, which naturally forces the leadership to think ahead, of course, within the context of a fiscal year, but also become more responsible towards what they are signing up for and what they are basically trying to provide in terms of value to the customers and to the individual business teams representing the customers, so that there is just not a plethora of initiatives and value creators, good or bad, doesn't matter, just fighting for attention, fighting for resources, increasing the costs of basically trying to get things done, and net not really providing the kind of value that you would need or you would like to see rather. Now, what do I mean by doing this on an annual basis, like once in a year, possibly in Q1, and then not doing it on a regular basis? Right? The first thing is the objectives have to be obviously more focused, and the key results need to be more streamlined and mission oriented, which in itself is a great thing. Now, having said that, retail companies go through a lot of what I would call as rethinking at the appropriate moments through the course of a year in terms of what they really want to do. And this is due to the nature of the business, where everything in retail companies is centered around a certain what I would call as a sales event, right? So you have, like, say, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the Big Billion Days, whatever those events are, whether they are based on a certain cultural holiday happening in a certain country where there is the propensity for people in general to buy more during those times and look for more deals to purchase, or it could be an artificially created event that creates an excitement in people, which is the case of what Amazon does, and so does Flipkart in India. Basically, many other retailers are obviously creating their own special events, just kind of creating that little bit of buzz. But for the most part, if you look at the retail operations across 4 quarters, it's leading into Q4, primarily in Q4 and a little bit into Q3, when most of these events are basically, I would say, organized or set up, which means that the events need to be catered towards supporting the customer needs at a very high pace and scale. So what does that mean is that the companies, the retail omnichannel companies, need to be heavily prepared to service the customers more than anything else during, let's say, Q4 of the year. In many retail companies, in fact, Q4 becomes a time when you cannot actually do much in terms of releasing software or making updates, creating new features, especially that's going to change customer behavior and impact customers in terms of how fast and how familiar their purchasing behaviors are. This is a big deal because it's not easy to change operational processes in retail companies to serve the changes you want to create for customers in the front end, which is the e-commerce website, even the storefronts for physical stores and so on. Many companies, especially the product experts, tend to first of all not know about this. They are fairly unfamiliar in terms of how a hybrid organization, a multi-channel, omni-channel operation works, and they tend to ignore these when they just kind of come out with strong statements saying innovation needs to happen at this pace. You got to release some feature XYZ on a daily basis, weekly basis, right? That madness is basically there across the board. And what it results is that uncomfortable challenge in terms of how do you do that in an organization that needs to respond, operationally speaking, also to changes that are happening. Training associates, employees within a company to meet those demands is much, much harder and equally important compared to working with your customers and enabling them to work with a certain change, certain innovation that you are creating. So the quarter basically is in some ways shifted from releasing features or giving out new things to the customer to actually ensuring that in the context of a website, the website is up and running. It's scalable. It's able to hit peak order volume in terms of the orders per minute. It doesn't crash. So the mind of the CTO is heavily oriented towards those needs and demands, and the business teams may still be asking for like, well, I need this and that, and you may still feel as the CEO that, well, we still are lacking in terms of what we need to give to the customers. But the reality is that you have to make sure that you're not breaking your company in the name of trying to ensure that your quarterly OKRs are basically being met. Now, of course, you can say, oh, well, we can plan the quarterly OKRs in such a way that Q4 is all about scalability and preparedness for events and all. But that kind of breaks the cycle in some ways and doesn't really make sure that work is happening, because something that starts in Q2 as an innovation feature probably ends the work for the software teams, the engineering teams in Q3, late Q3 at best, and then it's all pushed to next year, right? So there is this habit in retail companies, especially in omni-channel firms, where, unfortunately, if you're smart enough, you will mimic the actions of a fast pace, got to get this innovation, got to get these things done in Q1, Q2, and really ramp up the noise levels in Q3. And then you are done for the year. You just go back, enjoy your holidays, and come next year, Q1 is going to be slow anyways. Net, you keep pushing work year after year after year, especially if it is not something that's really being pushed down your throat to say, well, this work needs to be done this year no matter what, because the CEO is asking for it, or it's a compliance problem, or it's something that will be a survival issue. So that's part of the fundamental challenge, and I believe that an annual OKR cadence, where it is well structured, well planned, can actually give enough runway for the company to be prepared for these kind of holiday events, special events, and also ensure that the company is much smarter about when it is providing what to the customers. Now, there are a couple of other things that we can obviously think through in this case. The internet is obviously a very interesting space because it almost gives that false notion that things can be done no matter what at a very high pace, because it's all kind of like in front of your computer, right? But then the highly interconnected nature of omni-channel operations, where there's a lot of physical activity to move things, to make things happen, to get things to a customer, that cannot be discounted, which means that everything that you want to do with any kind of an innovation feature, something that you want to do with AI, if you all like attracted by it and you want to say, oh, I want to ordering products much smarter and make it much more, I would say, easier for customers to go pick up their products from a store, their orders from a store. Well, there's so much involved in fulfilling these orders in a store. I went through that exercise personally in Walmart several years back, and it isn't easy to just come up with some layout, some plan in a website and say, well, you know what, the operations will take care of it. Right. So I used to heavily over index on the store operations side, visiting stores, working with store managers, working with the backroom teams, spending maximum time over there before I thought I could ship a certain feature along with my team members. So it isn't an easy game. People need to really sink that in, and the product experts really need to take a step back when they are just giving out these blatant, templatized, wholesale remarks on how product management needs to be done. Product management will fail if it is going to be one where, in the name of being competitive and being at par with these internet product companies, you basically just run these quarterly OKRs and just keep, kicking out innovation or so-called innovation in the name of gaining market share and increasing your sales and so on. The other part of it is that when it comes to retail, eventually the game is about the right pricing, availability of the products, which is obviously in this case not just digital but also physical products, and the timeliness of making the products reach the customers. If the vast majority of your OKRs or your KRs in a particular year are oriented towards these three major parameters, you're already on the path towards creating the right value for the customer. So if you're a retail company and you are on the path towards ensuring that you got your OKR cadence right, rushing away into the OKR madness is probably still going to be the norm in most companies, because everyone wants to show that they are busy, they are contributing, and especially product managers have this inherent anxiety within them that they have to show something day in, day out. If not, the engineering managers are going to take it on you, right? So and so if you have these business teams also structured within your organization where product is also answerable to a certain set of business teams, be it in sales or merchandising, marketing, whatever it may be. So you do have some challenges there. So think through how you want to reorient your OKR process so that your backlog looks more manageable, your backlogs and your prioritization is not continuously shifting. The friction points are limited because everyone knows in the beginning of the year what they're exactly going to chase. The only thing that may shift is if some very much needed priority, especially when it comes to compliance, legal, or something that the CEO has sensed that needs to be done this year no matter what comes up, right? In which case you probably just got to drop everything and then go all hands on deck and make it happen. So unlike that and those kind of what I will call as unavoidable events, think about setting up your OKRs once a year and don't over index on the KRs, constantly trying to shift and change it. Make the metrics much more manageable, which I will cover in a later video. And just make sure that the OKRs are basically a more peaceful and manageable process in your organization. The vast amount of friction, frustration, anger, and what I would call as in the general sense of being lost and people throwing projectiles at each other from the product, business, engineering side of things usually happen just because the OKRs are ill-structured, and just that mad rush to get things done is not necessarily allowing anyone to get anything done. And eventually the company is just sitting there on the same old feature sets, same old experience for the customers, and eventually you're just banking on one of those big events, those big sale events, those holiday events to somehow shore you up and get you the GMV or the sales targets that you are basically chasing and helping you survive for yet another year. So strongly think about how you want to change the OKR process once you have the CEO overseeing the product organization. And from there, we can move on to the next aspects of how do you manage your backlog and what kind of KRs are best suited for retail organizations and so on. So until next time, have a nice day. See you soon. Bye.